Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Faber, and I'm with the Environmental Working Group. Today, we're going to learn more about a new study by Professor Graham Peaslee from Notre Dame University on PFAS in firefighting gear. We also have PPE specialist Jeff Kanabi, PFAS attorney and author Rob Ballant, and Diane and Paul Cotter from Worcester, Massachusetts. After we hear from our experts, we'd love to take your questions. You can submit a question in the comment section of your screen, and we will try to answer as many as we can at the end. This week, Professor Peaslee's study, Another Pathway for Firefighter Exposure to Per and Polyfluoroalkyl Substances, Firefighter Textiles, was published. Professor Peaslee, please tell us what you found.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks for this forum allowing us to present this. This is a paper we've been working on for a couple of years now, where we looked at firefighter textiles, the turnout gear that firefighters wear. It's a recognizable signature of all firefighters that have some personal protective equipment that keeps them safe in a fire. And it was brought to our attention by Diane that, was her husband's gear containing PFAS? And I didn't know. I had not talked about this. So we measured a set of gear collected by volunteers who were from the fire services of old and new gear. And we measured whether they all contain PFAS. Yes, indeed they do. They're in fact required to at this point because of the way that the textiles have to be water resistant. It's added to the textiles to provide that water resistance, both from inside and outside, to keep the gear dry. It's much safer. The firefighter's already carrying a lot of extra weight. To have wet gear would add to it, and that's unsafe. So having something dry is important. But the trouble we found is that it is heavily loaded with PFAS, at least the gear we looked at. We then got a larger set and identified all the PFAS, all the gear is treated with PFAS. And my concern was, like carpets, that when you put PFAS on it to keep it dry or stain resistant, that it will come off. And we know that happens on carpets. We know that happens on other textiles. There's a paper recently published on running gear. So this highly fluorinated layers of the turnout gear will probably show the same thing, in which case we're worried about where does that go. And so our study was just to show that, yes, we observed it on the gear, and all the PFAS are available on the gear. Even some of the PFOAs that aren't supposed to be there are there. It's at fairly small amounts, but there's nothing small about the amount once it comes off. There's part per million levels of this on the gear that can transfer off, and that gets into the environment, and that environment includes the firefighter who wears it. So that's the part of our paper that we published. There are ongoing studies to do more. Does it get into the firefighter, of course, and things like that. But that in itself has an effect. It's an independent study. It was not funded by anybody who's trying to sell you anything. It's not funded by anybody at all. We wanted to get the attention out there for two reasons. One is to inform the firefighter right away that they could probably take some proactive measures to reduce their exposure. We found hand to mouth, hand to garment contact would be enough to transfer it. And that's something that firefighters can learn how to reduce their exposure to the dust that sheds from this gear. Secondly, we're not telling firefighters to stop wearing the gear. Certainly not. It keeps them safe in a fire. Please wear your turnout gear. But shouldn't we be able to make gear that's safer? And shouldn't we be able to make gear that doesn't have this potential hazard? We don't know how big the hazard is. We know that PFAS is a hazard. We just don't know how much gets into the firefighter. But the fact that it's not zero is something that we now have to assume as a risk factor, and the firefighting services are very good at addressing and identifying risk factors and working safely within them. And I think there's a way to work safely with this gear. I think it would be really better for the long-term solution to have alternatives that are not fluorinated. And that's the purpose of this study, to sort of get that out there and tell people. And I think, the reason it's not necessary is that this wonderful chemical is designed for water resistance, at least in that gear. It's not putting out fires or anything like that. The firefighters are not on fire, hopefully. So it's just to provide water resistance. And there are other alternative technologies, or there soon will be lots of technologies that can keep textiles not water resistant. And that's the quick nutshell summary. I can talk for 3 more hours if you'd like, Scott, but I'll defer now to the other speakers.
Well, let me ask Jeff Kanabi, you're a PPE specialist. What can firefighters do to reduce the risks posed by PFAS in their gear?
Well, first, I want to kind of go over a little bit about some people in another study that's saying that the PFAS, it's a polymer product, and those polymers are the size of a volleyball and are too difficult to get inside your bloodstream. While that's true, the problem is once those polymers break down through either UV, high heat, or chemical degradation, those polymers break off and become smaller. Those smaller polymers are now small enough to get into your body, right, and into your bloodstream. So you got to ask yourself, do I really need to use this gear on this call? Am I going to have a thermal exposure where I need a structural set of firefighting gear? You got to ask yourself yes or no. You got to do that cost benefit analysis. If it's no, don't wear your gear. If you need to wear it, wear it. If you are handling it, make sure that you wash your hands immediately after handling it, because you can get that inadvertent ingestion of touching the gear and then eating some food and then ingesting those polymers that are coming off. Now, the other thing is the big thing is cleaning. All fire stations should be relatively clean at all times. However, sometimes the PP locker rooms or the apparatus don't get cleaned out enough, and you have that buildup of those broken off polymers that are now attached to the dust. And you stir up that dust, whether it be from an air hose or just wiping it down with a rag, and now you're inhaling that PFAS dust into your system. So what I do here in my particular facilities, I have not swept my office in nearly 2 years. I don an N95 mask, right? And I shot back with a HEPA filter, and I vacuum the entire room. Then I go and do a wet mop. So I was not given the opportunity for that dust to get airborne and inhale it. Once I'm done vacuum, I actually let my office sit a little bit. And if there is any dust, it just settles back down, and no harm, no foul. So I'm just trying to prevent myself from inhaling that dust. Now, in some cases, some departments keep their turnout gear in the apparatus bay, right? And typically you'll open up all the doors, you'll get the leaf blower, and you'll blow all that dust everywhere. You want to try to avoid that. Yes, apparatus bays are big. If you can vacuum it, great. If not, hose it down and then squeegee the water out. But try to keep those particles from becoming airborne to protect your respiratory system.
Great, and thanks, Jeff. And Paul and Diane Cotter, what more should firefighters be thinking about as they're trying to reduce their exposure to PFAS? And in particular, Graham mentioned that there are alternatives available. What steps can be taken to provide firefighters with PFAS-free gear?
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone, for joining us here today. And truly, we're looking to industry to make the changes. The industry itself is immersed in the fire service. They're at the sponsors of our firefighter cancer summits. They're immersed in our safety institution, the National Fire Protection Association. We see the logos from them at all of our functions. We want to believe in the manufacturers to come to the table with PFAS-free material. And we are aware of at least 2 that are going that route. The trouble that we're finding is that not everyone wants to go that route. And I think with this exposure that we've just revealed, what we want to say to the manufacturers is we will leave you behind if you don't provide us with PFAS-free material. The Boston fires study, where 67% of Boston firefighters had cancer, would contract cancer throughout their lifetime, should be cause for concern for us to not discuss the potential mitigation of PFAS. When we have someone like Philippe Grandjean, who discusses that PFAS can be harmful at undetectable amounts, we have to listen to that. So yes, that's where we'd like to see as industry make the change.
Thanks, Diane. And Rob Ballant, you're a PFAS attorney and author. Should manufacturers, should they have warned firefighters about these risks? And what's being done now to try to address some of the harms that firefighters may have faced?
Well, thanks, Scott, and thanks to everybody for having this forum where we can have this, I think, incredibly important discussion. We're talking today about a piece of information that helps us understand how firefighters have been exposed to these chemicals. And unfortunately, here we are, it's the year 2020, and firefighters are just now learning about this, even though these are chemicals that have been used for 50, 60 years and have likely been in these kind of uses for decades. And we're having to have independent scientists go out there like Dr. Peaslee and have to do these studies to finally reveal this information to the firefighting community. It took 20 years to get information out to the public, to the regulators, to the scientific community about the toxic effects of one of these PFAS chemicals, PFOA. And we now know that there are a number of these, including closely related PFOS, which was used heavily in AFFF, firefighting foam. It's now showing up in drinking water across the country as well. So if you're a firefighter, you've been exposed potentially not only on the job through foam or through gear or other exposures, but at home as well, possibly through drinking water or consumer products. So this is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle to understand where the exposure is coming from. And one of the things I'm really trying to focus on right now is to get the additional studies done to tell us what this exposure is doing to us, what it's doing to the firefighting community in particular. Most of the health studies that have been done to date have focused on people who were exposed through drinking water. They've maybe focused on one of the chemicals, but not the others. And now, as this information is finally coming out, we hear folks saying, well, we just don't know enough yet about what the effects are and how much of this exposure really is going to cause these effects. Well, I'm trying to get the studies done by independent scientists, people like Dr. Peaslee, who can confirm for us exactly what these chemicals are doing, what this mix of chemicals is doing to people who are exposed. And we've even brought litigation now out in Ohio federal court, where we've got a firefighter, an Ohio firefighter, who's seeking to represent a class of everyone in the country who is seeking to get these studies done, the health studies, to tell us what do these exposures mean to us? What happens when we have this mix of PFAS chemicals circulating in our blood and likely have been there for years and years? And again, it's incredibly important that for Dr. Peaslee to have brought this information out, for folks like Diane Cotter and Paul and Jeff and Scott to provide a forum like this where we can talk about this, get information out to people, and we can hopefully stop these exposures and at least start addressing how we protect ourselves going forward. So thanks for everybody for having this discussion today.
Great, thanks, Rob. One of the, before I turn to your questions, I first of all want to just remind our viewers, if you're just joining us, you're watching a Facebook presentation on Professor Peaslee's recent study on PFAS and firefighting gear. And I also wanted to share that two senators, Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire and Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado, have introduced legislation to enlist the National Institutes of Standards and Technologies to study the extent to which firefighting gear contains PFAS, as well as looking at developing a grant program to develop alternatives to gear made with PFAS. This is really a question for Professor Peaslee and Jeff. We're getting a lot of questions about routes of exposure. So once the PFAS is added to the gear, how does it break down? How does it get into the bodies of firefighters? Professor Peaslee and Jeff, can you help us answer that question?
Sure, I'll take a path at it. I'm not an exposure scientist, so I can't describe all the methods nor the relative risks of them. But there are several standard ways that we're exposed to chemicals. And our skin does a pretty good job at keeping most of the things outside our bloodstream. And that's the purpose of skin, amongst other things. And but of course, one of the biggest unknowns is, can this chemical pass through skin? And if it can, then it can go directly into the blood. And that's called dermal absorption. There are not one, but 3 different studies I know currently ongoing to see if that occurs on human skin with these chemicals. If I was a betting man and I said I wanted to pick a chemical that would go through skin, I might pick the world's best surfactant because that might have a good chance of doing so. I hope it doesn't, I really do, but my fear is that it might. So dermal absorption is a big one. We know from other studies that dermal absorption really occurs well in certain areas of the body, the neck, the armpits, and the groin. And so that's where people would be, if this material were nearby or shedding dust nearby, that would be one of it. One of the features of our study was that we found migration of the material from the outer layers into the inner layers because it was just rubbing in contact, and there was some migration taking place that way. And that inner layer, which was typically not treated with fluorine, was in contact with the skin, and there's loose PFAS on it. That's not a good situation. And so, do we launder it? Do we put an extra layer? I mean, there's all sorts of ways that I don't know the answer to, but that's the dermal absorption route is the biggest one. People have talked, and Jeff did a very nice job about inhalation of dust. That could be another course, or accidental ingestion. It's on dust in your hands, and we all eat a pound of dust a year, or in our lifetime, whatever it is. And it's a question as to how much accidental ingestion you get, and the better care you take to clean your hands and things like that, to not brush your hair at the table or whatever happens to be, might be ways to reduce dust exposure. And that's, there's a talk of inhalation of combustion products. Combustion products are really dangerous for all sorts of reasons, nothing to do with PFAS. And that's what the fire services are wearing self-contained breathing apparatus for, because the combustion products are highly dangerous and very carcinogenic. But I don't think PFAS is in that group. I'm not worried about combustion of PFAS. If you set a Teflon factory on fire, maybe. But in general, I'm not worried about ingestion of volatiles in a fire. They're also protected by masks anyway. I think it's the non-intentional ingestion that's worrisome. But I think Jeff can tell you more practical levels, of course, how the firefighters are exposed.
Yeah, so I'd like to add on top of that, and I know in Graham's study, he only studied outer shells that contain the PFAS finish, the DWR finish that prevents it from absorbing a certain amount of water. But what wasn't in the study, because there was none of this product available for it, there is a manufacturer that uses that same or a similar PFAS finish that is used on the outer shell, that is actually used on the inner part of the liner system. And it's used to tout a moisture management system that uses that DWR to prevent the garment, the thermal liner, from absorbing sweat. So now you have that PFAS chemical, for the most part, it's no longer the third layer, the furthest from your body. It's now on the closest layer of your body. And that could be of concern. And a lot of people aren't aware of that particular moisture management system. And I think that the fire service needs to understand that system and choose whether they want to have that system next to their body or not.
And Jeff, what are some other ways that people are asking who are watching us on Facebook? What are some other ways that firefighters are exposed to PFAS? I think obviously firefighting foam comes to mind, but are there, in addition to firefighting foam, is that the other primary way that firefighters might be exposed to PFAS?
Well, yeah. So you go out on a call and you have to use a Class B AFFF foam for a petroleum fire, and you get coated in that AFFF foam. Now, you should take that gear off when you get back to the station and wash it. There should be a study on whether you can actually effectively remove all of that AFFF foam, the PFAS, from that outer shell fabric. There's a belief that you might not be able to get it all off. There was some gear sent to Graham that was contaminated with foam, highly contaminated with a Class B AFFF foam. A control sample was sent in a separate box that did not get exposed to the foam, and the levels of total fluorine on the foam contaminated set was 50% higher than the non-contaminated set of gear that was sent to Graham. That could be a problem.
Even after washing.
Even after washing for a total of 3 hours, 3 separate wash cycles, using all the NFPA approved methods. That should be studied. If foam gets on the gear, can we get it out?
And for folks who are just joining us, you're watching a Facebook Live presentation on a new study by Professor Graham Peaslee on PFAS and firefighting gear. Diane and Paul Cotter, we're also getting a lot of questions about something you mentioned, Diane, which is alternatives. Can you say a little bit more about what alternatives are available? And maybe, Jeff, you'd like to add to this too, and how effective they are. And I think a lot of folks are interested in that.
Well, sure. We were contacted last year by Lakeland, who was one of our manufacturers, and they came right out of the gate wanting to provide immediate service to, make firefighting gear safer. And we were so appreciative of that. That was a result of the Notre Dame commercial that they did for us. What are you fighting for? And we were fighting to protect the brave. And not too long after that, we heard from Safety Components, and they have a product called PF0. I know that Jeff can talk a little bit about that. And we're hearing more and more that some are coming forward. So industry is going to make the change here. So if you're not on board with PFAS free, we want it out of all 3 layers. We don't want a Teflon moisture barrier, and we certainly don't want it migrating through to the thermal liner. We have quite a bit of resistance from industry, and I think that is the problem that we have to overcome, is the resistance from industry that still is more concerned about backstock than they are about the firefighters, who they seem to be immersed.
If I could add one more point to Jeff's, a lot of municipal firefighters never come in contact with foam. They may train with it in training. In my 27 years, I never used foam, AFFF. We trained with soap at the academy, but I didn't spend a lot of time on engine companies, but I never came in contact with AFFF in my career. So my exposures, if any, have been strictly with turnout gear.
Jeff, can you talk a little bit about alternatives? And we also got one very specific question, which was what kind of gear might have the inner layer treated with PFAS?
Well, again, I'm going to just state facts. This is not an opinion. I'm just going to state a fact of which manufacturer has their ISO-dry moisture management system, and that's Lions Apparel turnout gear. They've been using that PFAS finish in their inner liners for, I believe, a couple of decades. So that information is now out there. People can educate themselves on whether they believe that and is appropriate use of a PFAS chemical on their inner liner. Getting to the alternatives fabrics that are out there. I don't have too much information about the Lakeland product, but I do have information about the Safety Components PF0. It's my understanding, because the manufacturer came to meet with me back, I believe, in November or December of last year. That product does meet all of the NFPA 1971 testing requirements, so it can be used as an outer shell. Again, it's not as good as a fluorinated finish. So there are some concerns or beliefs that while it does resist the absorption of water into the outer shell, it does absorb a little bit more than the leaded stuff, we'll say, the fluorinated stuff. But you have to do that cost benefit analysis. Is my health worth it?
Right.
On the other side is they're concerned that alternative finish, the gear could look dirtier because it'll get stained more readily than a fluorinated compound. It could absorb chemicals more readily than a fluorinated compound. Those are all valid concerns, but one of the concerns that people aren't talking about is once a contaminant gets in between that fluorinated compound and the fabric, it is very difficult to get out using NFPA-approved cleaning methods. Conversely, if you don't have a fluorinated compound, one of those alternatives, and a product does get in there, it should be easier to get out because that fluorinated compound isn't locking it down. So using all NFPA methods, it should be relatively easier to get those contaminants out. Just wash your gear more.
Right. And we did have a number of questions about washing and how washing contaminated gear might impact other things that are in the firehouse. Is that a risk that?
Well, if you're following all safe handling procedures and you have your washing area isolated from your other areas of your firehouse, especially the living quarters, and you don't cross-contaminate any of your gear, you shouldn't have any problems with that. And yes, when you are washing this product, yes, it is going down the sewage system and it's going to the wastewater treatment plant. And that becomes another issue that is another area of concern. But you have to be able to wash your gear.
Right. We only have time for a few more questions. One is just really what comes next. Maybe it's a question for Rob and Graham. How do we better understand how firefighters are being exposed to PFAS and the health risks they may face? What are you doing in particular that comes next, and what should government, universities, other experts be doing to help us really understand the risks that might be posed by PFAS in general, not just PFAS in turnout gear? Go ahead, Rob. Why don't you go first, and then we'll.
Sure. You know, I guess in my view, we need more studies and we need more research, and we need to be doing studies that are big enough and comprehensive enough to actually be able to confirm some of these health effects. You know, a lot of what's been going on to date, involves this sort of argument in defense. Well, there just isn't sufficient proof. There's not sufficient evidence to connect this exposure with this particular health outcome. And what we've learned through dealing with that issue on PFOA and drinking water exposure is we really need big comprehensive studies that have enough people involved that we can actually confirm these things statistically. And Dr. Peaslee can talk about that more, but particularly when we're dealing with cancer studies, or anything where you're suspecting there might be a cancer risk, you really need thousands, if not tens of thousands of participants in these studies. And ATSDR and the CDC have finally gotten some funding to initiate some studies of PFAS chemicals in different places across the country. Unfortunately, they're focusing primarily upon people exposed through drinking water, and have kind of carved out people with occupational exposures like this. So unfortunately, that's not really encompassing this. And I know there are a number of studies, and Dr. Peaslee can talk about it, that are going on now that are trying to fill in this gap. But again, we've got to find a way to get the funding to do the big enough studies. And that ties into what I was mentioning before. I'm trying to do that. Unfortunately, in one of the few ways left that's available to us, which is unfortunately going to litigation. And as a lawyer, I'm the first one to tell you we shouldn't have to do that to get studies like this done. But so far, it's been one of the only effective ways to get the funds necessary to do big studies like this.
Right. Professor Peaslee?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I mean, the size of the study, this is an independent study, unfunded, so we did just samples of opportunity. Imagine now doing that with people's blood work. I mean, it's expensive. You want to do it right, and you want literally thousands to tens of thousands of people engaged. Then you can see statistically whether a rare disease, there are plenty of rare diseases the firefighters are coming down with, and we don't understand why. And there's no way that we're going to be able to connect a cancer with this particular jacket or anything like that. That's not the purpose. But to see that, could PFAS be playing a role in either its immunotoxicity or in a direct disease correlation? And Rob has done that before with PFOA, and it was a remarkable study. And it was commissioned, not intentionally, but it got there, and boy, did it have an effect. And I think he's absolutely right. Larger studies are what we need. I will say that on our part, we're continuing to do studies. We're looking at the dust that comes from this in fire stations. We're looking at the dermal absorption routes. We're looking at anything else we can think of that we think will have a role. And we'll put those studies out there for other people to copy. That's the purpose of science, is that it's reproducible, that you get out there and other people will do it. And somebody may come up with a much bigger problem by, oh wow, this is not the exposure route, this is the exposure route, because we didn't realize it was there. And the answer may be it's perfectly safe, but precautionary principle is, we have seen that it's a potential exposure risk. Why would we do it unless it's absolutely essential? And I think this chemical isn't absolutely essential. I think firefighting gear is absolutely essential. I think PPE is essential, and the use of it has to be. But could we make it safer? And that's a strong argument, not to say we should be going ahead doing small studies to prove that we can get safer gear out there. And the firefighters have to do that themselves. They're risk management experts. They know when to go into a burning building. They know how to evaluate gear and see that it works. And that's what's safe for them. So I encourage the fire services to do that for themselves. But with this discussion in mind, that nobody knew about this before. So now we know about it. We can just factor it in as one of the factors. And that's the purpose of this.
And if I could, Scott, I'd like to bring up one more quick point. And after this Facebook Live, you'll have a lot of manufacturers saying our gear is PFOA free. 100%, we acknowledge that. Every gear manufacturer has been PFOA free since right about 2014. However, all gear certified to NFPA 1971 prior to 2014 has PFOA on it. There's no questions about that. You can ask any manufacturer, they'll tell you that. Any mill that makes the fabric, it is on there. So here's the problem. NFPA 1851 says that gear should be retired after 10 years. Well, we're still wearing that till 2024. So we're having a continued long-term exposure. Now, the new replacement, the C6 PFAS, which is PFOA free, understand, we completely accept that thought process. However, once that finish starts to degrade, that chemical breaks off, the side chain polymers break off, and Graham can confirm this. They break off and then they form the C8 PFOA compound. We are now back to square one.
Great, thanks.
Yeah,
so that's a problem.
Jeff obviously read the article. He did a very good job of that. The side chain fluoropolymers are not C6, they're C8 still, and that's the trouble. They were never PFOA because they're not called PFOA. They just turn into PFOA, and they are long chain polymers on the outer shell, and that's the issue there. But very good, Jeff.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Diane and Paul Cotter, anything you want to add before we sign off?
Just that truly we're really glad for the opportunity to elevate the issue. Paul and I are also leaders in the National PFAS Coalition that is helping to shed a light on exposures through all sorts of communities. And truly we are for first responders, we'd like the opportunity to question Capitol Hill about how this went on for 20 years. I don't think there's another occupation where this would be acceptable, and it shouldn't be acceptable for America's bravest.
Diane, thanks, Paul. And thanks to all of our other experts, Rob Ballant, Graham Peaslee, Jeff Kanabi. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There you go.